Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera untuk kita semuanya. Selamat datang Ibu Bapak di kota Yogyakarta. Kami berharap Yogyakarta memberikan kenyamanan dan memberikan satu pencitraan dan juga tidak akan pernah lupa kehadiran Bapak Ibu di Yogyakarta. Pesan dari Gubernur DIY, jangan bawa pulang lagi uang yang dibawa dari kampung halaman. Okay, now to be first presentation, we will invite the first Professor Dr. Wolf Dietrich Bert Schneider. Welcome to in front. And the second, I will invite Associate Professor Kenji Matsumoto, PhD. And the third, my senior, Professor Dr. Wancai Bunrut from Faculty of Sports Science, Chulalongkorn University, Thailand. The first I will introduce to all participants, Professor Dr. Wolf from University Paderborn Department of Sport and Health. He have more experience doing research in the field of youth participant in sport. He retired from his position as professor and chair of the sports science department at the University of Paderborn, but is still engaged in research on the contribution of sport activity to adolescent development and conducting health-related intervention project for young people. Professor Wolf have more book to be editor book, 14 books, and he have published a journal about 200 articles. Applause to Professor Wolf. So, he was vice president of the International Association for Physical Education and Higher Education and member of the board of director of the National Institute of Sports Science in Germany. So, the second presenter, Associate Professor Kenji Matsumoto, PhD, from Graduate School of Human Environment Studies, Kyushu University, Japan. He have more experience. He take PhD on Kyushu University, Fukuoka, Japan, 2005. So, he have professional experience until now to be associate professor, Graduate School of Human Environment Studies, Kyushu University, Fukuoka, Japan. And he have to be peer review publication more 25. So, he have experience in presentation international conference more 27. Maybe in the next time, to all participants can more intensive collaboration. is more experience and more visiting overseas to be visitor university, going to South Korea, Czech Republic, Japan, Portugal, New Zealand, and Yogyakarta is second home to Professor Wancai Bunrut. Applause to Professor Wancai Bunrut. In the first session, we have 2 hours with 3 presenters. And the first time, I invite Professor Dr. Wolf to presentation about the topic, and you have time about 40 minutes, 30 until 40 minutes. Time is yours. Applause to Professor Wolf.
Well, good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. First, I would like to express my deepest thanks, sincere thanks for this kind invitation. It is not only an honor and a privilege to be here, it is also a great pleasure. For me, it is the second time to be in Indonesia. First time was in the early 80s when I was in Jakarta. In Yogyakarta is the first time for me, so it's a pleasure to be back in Indonesia. Today you will listen to a mixture of topics, of issues. It is exercise physiology, it is coaching, and it is the social sciences of sport. So it will extremely exciting. In the following, I would like to give an overview on young people's lifestyle and their key elements: nutrition, physical education, and sedentary behavior, especially media use. In addition, it will be demonstrated how these lifestyles are linked with overweight and obesity becoming increasingly a serious public health problem also in Indonesia. I will also point out more systematically what we know about the causes and the consequences of this public health problem during childhood, and what we need to do to produce sustainable outcomes. The empirical evidence of my observation mainly refers to Europe. In this context, 3 questions might arise. Why young people? Youth is a fascinating subject because it is a seismograph and trendsetter and makes predictions possible. Young people reflect special social trends in their bodies, in their psyche, in their behavior. They reflect, you may say, the health status of society as a whole. Question 2 that might arise: are overweight and obesity a problem that is relevant for Indonesia? My answer is yes. Like in many other countries in Southeast Asia, Indonesia faces the so-called nutrition transition. That means it suffers from the double burden of malnutrition. That is, that undernutrition and overweight coexists at the same time in Indonesia. And question 3, why care about Europe? We live in Indonesia. My answer to this question is more extensive and more differentiated. The first reason is quite simple. I'm from Europe, and having conducted a big research project on 25 countries in Europe, I'm quite familiar with the situation. The countries in Europe are diverse regarding political, economic, cultural and environmental context. Despite their variation, all of them are facing the same problem, and this is the alarming increase in lifestyle-related diseases and its consequences for physical and also for mental health. Diversity is also the characteristic of Indonesia, with its 15,000 isles, with hundreds of languages and hundreds of ethnic groups. And even if the conditions under which people in Europe and Indonesia live are worlds apart, Europe can serve as an example to show how specific factors of lifestyle vary by place and over time, and how fast changes in lifestyle may take place. And my last argument for referring to Europe as an example, despite all the differences between Indonesia and Europe, which exclude simple comparisons, the main causes for the development of overweight and obesity, their consequences, and their intervention programs designed to combat these serious public health problems are likely to be the same. Yes, we have a technical problem. To go ahead. Oh, yes, this one. Oh, this is okay. No. Yeah. So I'm sorry for this short interruption. If you look at newspapers or health service in Europe, you find headlines such as "Childhood Today, a world of fast food junkies, couch potatoes and media freaks. The state of health of the young generation is deplorable." Such statements aim at young people's lifestyles characterized by an increasing prevalence of fatness, declining physical activity and fitness, and increasing sedentary behavior. Young people are diagnosed as a higher risk group on the way to an overweight society. Now the question is, does this scenario represent an accurate picture, or is it a distorted view of reality? Data on the prevalence of overweight and obesity vary, and so do data on nutrition, on physical activity, and on media use. And the same can be stated for the influence of social, economic, and structural variables and their interaction with individual level factors. Whereas clinical aspects and psychosocial consequences of overweight and obesity during childhood are well documented evidence for the effectiveness of intervention programs designed to prevent overweight and obesity is scarce. Before we begin to discuss our common problem, we should be clear about the key terms. And this is quite important. First, the key terms overweight and obesity. Occasionally, even in scientific literature, you find a slippage between these terms. We should be clear. Each term refers to a different phenomenon. Overweight refers to body weight in excess of a fixed standard. Obesity refers to an excess of fat. And in the context of development and overweight, the term lifestyle plays an important part, also in my lecture. It needs clarification, and we should be clear. The lifestyle of an individual encompasses normative orientation and behavior patterns developed through the process of socialization, and it varies with age, gender, and socioeconomic background. Now, what do we know about the prevalence of overweight and obesity in Europe? If you look at this map, you can see a clear gradient from east to west and from north to south, with prevalence rates lowest in East Europe and highest in Southern Europe. And as you will see later, there is a reason for it. Independent of the varying prevalence figures, most national studies carried out in recent years report three common trends. First, the increase of overweight and obesity in both boys and girls in most countries. Then childhood is becoming the most critical phase, and overweight and obesity is more spread in families with low living standard. As you will see later, it is different in Indonesia. And so far the prevalence rates in Europe. But what do we know about Indonesia? And here I was quite lucky. There are not too many studies with representative data in Indonesia, but just 4 months before this conference, an overview appeared by Rachmi, Lee and Bauer, summarizing the empirical findings of relevant serious quantitative studies and telling us something about the magnitude, about the risk factors of overweight in Indonesia. And here you can see what they found out. Childhood stunting has slightly decreased in Indonesia, but remains high. The prevalence of overweight and obesity is rising, and it is rising dramatically in the urban regions of Indonesia. There is a wide range, as you can imagine, between low and high prevalence rates. Prevalence is higher in boys among children and higher in females during adolescence. And the prevalence is higher in urban regions, in the big cities, and also in families with a high socio-economic standards. What we see at first sight is there are differences, but there are also similarities between Europe and Indonesia. Now to the causes of overweight and obesity. The question is, how much is genetically determined And what is the role of environment? Is obesity genetic? Yes, of course. It runs in families, we find it in twins, it resists treatment. But then, why is it increasing year after year? Because of genetic factors? No, not really. Mutations take thousands of years to establish themselves, and our genes do not substantially differ from those of our ancestors. Then, obesity environmentally induced? Is it due to a sedentary lifestyle? Yes, of course. But then, why is it that there are people who eat a lot, do not exercise at all, and keep lean? And why is it that overweight and obesity continue to increase while food consumption does not? And why is it that in many developing countries and transition countries where physical work is widespread and westernized lifestyle has only reached a minority of population, the prevalence of overweight and obesity is alarming? Today, there is general agreement that with a view that overweight and obesity is the effect of complex interactions of an interplay of genetic factors and environmental factors, the mechanisms of which are not yet resolved. And there is also agreement that specific attention has to be paid to energy balance, related lifestyle elements, nutrition, sedentary behavior, especially screen time, and physical activity. Well, and now just a few data to nutrition. Well, in Europe, the current health report on school-aged children of 2017, of this year, observes the following trend. Daily consumption of fruit and vegetables increased slightly in the last 10 years, but overall prevalence remains low. Daily consumption of sugary soft drinks and sweets decreased noticeably in the last 10 years, but consumption remains high. And there are social inequalities. Daily fruit and vegetable consumption is higher, in sweet consumption is lower in families with a high living standard. And when it comes to the question of the development of energy intake in the course of the last decades and years, the general result for Europe is contrary to popular belief. Recent studies show that young people's total energy intake has not increased but decreased over time. As to Indonesia, a trend towards unhealthy food and drinks has been identified in the big cities and in urban areas. But representative studies for Indonesia in its diversity are still missing. So we may state, to date, empirical evidence is not sufficient to blame young people's nutritional behavior as the main cause for the recent rise of overweight and obesity. It's better. And now we come to the next point, sedentary time. If the total energy intake is unlikely to be the major factor causing overweight, we need to take a closer look at energy expenditure, powerful markers of which are sedentary behavior, especially media use and physical education. What do we know about sedentary time? There was a time when the daily life of young people in Europe was characterized by play, games and sport, and an impressive amount of outdoor physical activities, but times have changed. Today, young people live in a digital world, and their leisure time is characterized to no little degree by their use of electronic media. And when it comes to the role of screen time, the assumption of media being a major cause for the rapid increase of overweight is quite popular in Europe. And now again a few data. There are significant declines of viewing TV across Europe, but computer use for gaming and non-gaming purposes increased sharply in the last decade. And time for viewing TV is ranging between 1 and 5 hours a day in children and adolescents, and time spent with computers has more than doubled in the last 10 years, and in average it is 4 hours during weekdays and it is 5 hours for weekend days. So you can add computer time and TV time, and you see how much young people are sitting and not doing any physical exercise. There is no doubt sedentary behavior is on the rise. With continuous technological advances, the choice of innovative and attractive devices supports high levels of sedentary time in the next future. This statement is valid for Europe, but it is valid for Indonesia as well. Young people today all over the world, they live in a digital world. Now, what do we know about the involvement in sport and physical activity? The findings on physical activity and sport involvement are remarkably consistent throughout Europe. Boys are more active than girls. There is a decline with age, and young people from socially privileged families play more sports than their counterparts from the bottom end of the social ladder. The three most frequently studied indicators in national studies on sport and physical activity of children in Europe include membership in sports clubs, the daily or weekly time budget of physical informal sporting activity, and time allocated to school physical education. As indicated by the rates of participation in organized sport, European adolescents' involvement in sport is extremely high. About 2/3 of the children below 12 and about 50% of male and female adolescents are engaged in organized sport. That means in sport clubs. And enthusiasm for sport also leaves its traces in the area of informal activities. In almost all European countries today, the popularity of non-organized sport is increasing. And what do we know about physical education at schools? School physical education is extremely important because it is compulsory for all children. All have to go to school. That means all have to take part in physical education. But what about the status current surveys in Europe show that the time allocated to PE is constantly declining. So what we can say is that young people's sport involvement in its organized form as well in its informal way is impressive. But overall, children and young people today are likely to be less active than in earlier generations. And I would like to give you just 3 examples as explanations for this observation. For instance, in England, the number of children being brought to school by private cars has almost doubled within the last 10 years, from 16% to 33%. That means every 3rd child is being brought to school by car. In Switzerland, children are spending 80 minutes per day in cars, buses, or trains. 80 minutes just sitting. And Germany, I would like to refer to the relation between cars and children. In the 16th, the relation was 3 kids to 1 car, and today the relation is 1 kid to 3 cars. Though organized sport and informal sport activities have never been so popular, they cannot compensate the rising screen time behaviors. The levels of physical education activity remain unchanged on a low level. So altogether, that means, as a result, then that the requirements of international guidelines for daily physical activities are not met. It is 60 minutes per day, 60 minutes of moderate to intensive physical activity, and it is not met by 70% of the young people. So that is quite a lot. That means we have a big problem in Europe. Concerning the activity level of young people in Indonesia, no representative data exists. The few studies that exist show a gap between rural and urban areas, and this gap is too big to speculate about mean values. Overall, data is not sufficient to come to a final conclusion. Now, to energy balance. Young people in European countries live in an environment that encourages low levels of physical activity and high levels of sedentary behavior, and promotes the intake of energy-dense foods and drinks at the same time. So it seems likely that the rise of prevalence of overweight and obesity in Europe can be linked to these factors. And if you look at this map, no, it's more than that. I checked it. If you look at the environmental factors on energy balance and leave away genetics, you can say the food intake and energy expenditure have to be in balance. There is an increase of fast food, there is an increase of sugary drinks, and the portions are getting bigger and bigger. Activity of daily living is going down, and of sedentary behavior is going up. And that means that body fat mass is increasing. That is obvious. And this explanation is convincing, but what do we know about the relationship between the key factors? Just to give you one example, if you look at this slide, you see time and consumption of sugared beverages during TV watching. And you see the more you look, the more you view TV, the more sugary drinks and fast food you are taking. Now, when it comes to the question, what is the relationship between these factors? You can say, well, media and physical activity, there is no relationship. Media use and nutrition, there is a positive relationship. Nutrition and physical activity, sporting activity and healthy nutrition, a positive correlation. Sedentary behavior, unhealthy nutrition, positive correlation. Sedentary behavior and healthy nutrition, negative correlation. And what is interesting is, if it comes to Indonesia, the results are very similar. You see there is an association between overweight and the level of physical activity, and there is an association of TV viewing and nutrition, and there is an association between overweight and sedentary behavior. And if it comes to causal relationships, and if we link our results of Indonesia and of Europe, we can say, well, first, no sufficient evidence to support a causal relationship between nutrition and overweight. There is an inverse relationship between overweight and physical activity. Between sport participation and internet-related activities, they do not reinforce or suppress each other. They exist largely side by side. And sedentary behavior is found to be associated with the risk of overweight and obesity. So we for time reasons, we want to drop this. As you can imagine, if you do, for instance, a multiple regression analysis, you can also say something about the influence of the social structural variables, and the influence is quite strong. But I have to hurry up a little bit, though my time has not come to an end, because I started a quarter past and now it's a quarter to. That means 30 minutes. But nevertheless, I hurry up. What about the consequences? The consequences, now in very short, young people have become less fit. They are facing health problems, and health risks are associated with overweight and obesity to a large degree. And there are also social, emotional, and psychological consequences of overweight and obesity. There are considerable psychosocial effects, such as lower levels of self-esteem, body satisfaction, and higher levels of anxiety and stress. These are empirical facts. So just to let you know something about self-esteem and overweight, you may say it is more important for girls than for boys. decreasing self-esteem with increasing age, and they are exposed to stigmatization, and there is a negative impact on life as a whole. Now the question is, what do we need to do? And here again it is interesting, and it is a kind of discrepancy. On the one hand, everybody knows about the problem of increasing overweight and obesity on the one hand, and on the other hand, updated reviews in Canada, the USA, and also in Europe, they come to the same conclusion. There is no model of best practice yet. The intervention programs focus on either nutrition, on either sedentary behavior, on either physical activities, but never do they try to put the three key factors together. And that seems to be the only possibility to combat this increasing public health problem. Now, at the end, let me finish with this slide here. You see the tracking of physical activity and health from childhood to adulthood. And you see here the chance that people who are physically active, that they are healthy, is quite big. And also we find that those people, young people being physically active, are likely to be physically active during adulthood as well. And again, there is a very strong relationship between physical activity or physical inactivity and health. And also, young people who are healthy, young people who are healthy are likely to be healthy as adults. And now, what is even more important, you see, physically active young people are likely to be healthy during adulthood, and on the other hand, those people who are healthy while they are young will be healthy while they are adults. So let me finish. All of you are involved in the educational system, in the sports science system, maybe some of you in the sports organization system. I think all we can do and we should do is to do everything to keep our young people physically active, and to try to do everything to make clear that an exaggerated amount of sedentary screen time is dangerous and causes overweight and obesity. So, thank you very much indeed. This is the end of my lecture, and I hope it wasn't too late now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Wolf. Your presentation is very best and very interesting. Maybe overweight, obesity is international problem, and maybe in the room who have more lipid, obesity person, or nothing, all of slim. Thank you. And now we continue with two presenter. We invite Professor Kenji Matsumoto. Your time is yours.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kenji Matsumoto. I'm from Japan. The title of my presentation is The Exploration of Effective Cross-Training Alternatives to Running on Land. So I would like to introduce myself. My research interests include human locomotion. I have been working on research to better understand gait characteristics in humans. We have been measuring physiological and biomechanical responses during running in order to understand why we run the way we run, or why we work the way we work. But as you know, running is very popular. But the running is one of the most popular exercises with relatively high risk of injury. It's ironic, but running is popular, but the injury risk is relatively high. So this slide shows the impact forces during walking and running. This is the force times body weight, and this is time. And did you know that when you run, each foot observe 3 times body weight impact forces during running? And when you walk, your impact forces on the lower extremity, each foot, elicit 1.5 body weight, each foot. That means if you run for 30 minutes for exercising, for releasing stress, and then you obtain 3 times body weight impact forces for 6,000 times for 30 minutes. You understand? And then I would like to introduce the beauty of research. What is the beauty of research of yours? To me, the beauty of research the beauty of my research is to manipulate impact forces on human body during exercise. For example, during running, as I said, you obtain 3 times body weight each foot. And I was told by the Dr. Bates, he said that the beauty of biomechanics is to manipulate excessive force exerted on human body and to explore appropriate or effective cross-training alternative in order to avoid injury and also enhance performance. So, how can we change the impact forces on the lower extremity? Is there anyone who have idea to manipulate impact forces on your foot during running? Each foot, again, 3 times body weight. You know? And then how would you change the impact forces during running? Someone can say, well, we can decrease running speed. If we run slow, it actually, the impact forces on the lower extremity decrease with decreasing running speed. But also, we have to be careful that if the physiological demand would also decrease with decreasing speed. That doesn't work. We want a similar and or higher physiological demand with a reduction in impact forces. That's most effective cross-training alternatives. So unfortunately, we can run slow, and the impact forces on the lower extremity decrease. But again, this seems doesn't work. So what can we think of decreasing the magnitude of impact forces on the lower extremity and effective cross-training alternative which provides similar and or higher physiological demand? How can we change? Please think about it. How can we change the impact forces on the lower extremity but can produce similar training effect? That would be an ideal cross-training methods. I mean, evidence-based practices to enhance sports performances. So the purpose of my presentation today is to explore effective cross-training alternatives to running on land because people don't want to get injured. I would like to introduce our line of research to manipulate impact forces during running. We thought about manipulating stride frequency. Maybe we can change the cadence to reduce impact forces on the lower extremity. Maybe we can change direction of locomotion. The direction of locomotion is not only forward. We can walk backward. We can run backward, for example. And then, why don't we use a body weight support treadmill to enhance performance while reducing impact forces on the lower extremity? And finally, we thought about, what about running in an aquatic environment? Why don't we use influence of buoyancy and or resistance of water during running? First, I would like to introduce the physiological and biomechanical responses during running at different stride frequency. So this slide shows the effect of stride length and mileage on probability of fracture. As you can see, it has been reported that probability of fracture increase with increasing running mileage. If you run more, you will have more chance to have a stress fracture on the lower extremity. And interestingly, probability of fracture during running at increased stride frequency by 10% was lower than that of running at your preferred pace. And this slide shows the stride frequency manipulation of metabolic cost and joint loading. As I said, the probability of stress fracture would decrease when running at preferred stride frequency plus 10% condition. And this is the figure of the relationship between stride frequency and metabolic cost. And on your right-hand side, this is a relationship between stride frequency and joint loading. And it has been reported that a 10% increase in stride frequency from the preferred stride frequency during treadmill running produced similar metabolic costs while reducing impact forces on the lower extremity. And we have investigated muscle activity during running at different stride frequency conditions. And we observed that there was no significant difference between in the muscle activity from the lower extremity, such as rectus femoris, biceps femoris, tibialis anterior, and gastrocnemius during running at preferred stride frequency and preferred stride frequency, which is higher than, which is 10% higher than that of preferred stride frequency. So in summary, a 10% increase in stride frequency from the preferred stride frequency during running may produce similar amount of metabolic cost, muscle activity, while reducing loading on lower extremity and or risk of lower extremity injuries. So it may be helpful to ask for runners to increase stride frequency by 10% from that when running at preferred pace. That's one summary. And next, why don't we change the direction of locomotion? As I said, I would like to introduce backward running. Backward running has been used as a rehabilitation and as a fitness enhancement recently. I am not sure if I want to wear this cap, but it has been reported that backward running would be effective method for the rehabilitation and fitness enhancement. And this slide shows the ground reaction forces during forward and backward running at the same speed. As you can see, during backward running, the active peak, impact peak disappeared during backward running. And the peak ground reaction, vertical ground reaction forces during backward running was lower than that of forward running. So in short, during backward running, less impact forces on the lower extremity than when running forward. However, previous research reported that the muscle activity from the quadriceps and tibialis anterior during backward running was higher than that of forward running at the same speed. So less impact forces on the lower extremity, but higher magnitude of muscle activity during backward running when compared to forward running. And also, it has been reported that metabolic cost during backward running was higher than that of forward running. So it seems like it's an ideal mode of exercise to elicit decreased impact forces on the lower extremity with higher demand of muscle activity and metabolic cost. So in summary, backward running may produce greater metabolic cost and muscle activity while reducing loading on lower extremity. But one question came up on my mind. Would backward running training be effective for the enhancement of forward running? Again, do you think that backward running would produce enhanced performance enhancement in forward running? It has been reported that backward running was useful for forward running performance enhancement. For example, it has been reported about that a 30% decrease in VO2 during forward running at some maximal level. So it seems that backward running would be helpful for the forward running performance modification and enhancement. Wow. Why? Yeah, why? Why backward running would be helpful for forward running performance? We investigated muscle activity during forward and backward running. With an exception of the rectus femoris, the magnitude, there was no significant difference in muscle activity from the biceps femoris, tibialis anterior, and gastrocnemius during forward and backward running. So it suggests that with an exception of the rectus femoris, we will obtain similar amount of magnitude of muscle activity from the lower extremity during backward running compared relative to the forward running. But when we look at the muscle activity pattern, it seems that rectus femoris peaks at the same period of gait cycle, which is late swing phase and early stance phase. It seems that forward running, backward running elicits a similar muscle activity pattern. However, when we look at the biceps femoris muscle activity pattern, during forward running, biceps femoris muscle activity peaks at swing phase. When we swing reg, the biceps femoris would peak. But on the other hand, during backward running, it peaks at the end of gait cycle. So the peaks from the biceps femoris during forward running and backward running are different. So it may be different muscle coordination pattern exist. And then we look at the muscle coordination patterns during forward and backward running. On this axis, it is biceps femoris, and on this axis, I plotted muscle activity from the rectus femoris. As you can see, muscle coordination patterns between forward and backward running are different. It means that forward running and backward running are two different modes of exercise. Then why backward running enhances forward running performance? Because these two modes of exercise are completely different. It is our opinion that backward running enhanced forward running performance because it enhanced total physical fitness, so that may have resulted in the forward running performance enhancement at present, because we know that these two modes of exercise are completely different exercise. So it may be simply it can be thought simply at present that because backward running requires similar and or higher physiological demand to forward running, backward running may have enhanced forward running performances. Next, I would like to introduce body weight support treadmill running. This is lower body. Can you? I don't know how to go back. Lower body positive pressure. With that treadmill, we can change the running speed and the amount of body weight support independently. And this slide shows the muscle activity pattern during running on LBPP treadmill. This is muscle activity patterns from the rectus femoris, tibialis anterior, gastrocnemius, and rectus femoris. But I would like you to look at the muscle activity pattern are similar with increasing body weight support. So, and this is the muscle activity pattern during LBPP treadmill running at more dramatical increase in body weight support. It was suggested that muscle activity patterns may not change with increasing body weight support. In short, muscle activity pattern would be similar with increasing body weight support. However, the magnitude of muscle activity during running with body weight support, muscle activity magnitude decrease with increasing body weight support. And when we look at the body weight support up until 80% body weight support, the muscle activity magnitude decrease with increasing body weight support. However, we think that there may be a threshold for the reduction in the muscle activity magnitude when running with body weight support. During LBPP treadmill running, we have to increase running speed with increasing body weight support. So if you increase your body weight support, you have to run faster to induce similar amount of physiological demand. So in order to maintain our aerobic stimulus, you have to run, it was suggested to run at fast speed with increasing body weight support. So in summary, running on the lower body positive pressure treadmill can be used as a cross-training alternative to running on land with effective running speed and body weight support combinations. As I said, it was suggested to run faster with increased body weight support. So these two combinations, but importantly, muscle activity pattern would not change. The similar muscle activity pattern you can obtain. So similar mode of exercise you can do, but you have to run faster in order to induce similar physiological demand. Lastly, I would like to introduce running in an aquatic environment. So running in water has been used as an effective mode of exercise as a rehabilitation and or fitness enhancement. And we are focused on deep water running. Are you familiar with deep water running? Deep water running, you have to wear a buoyancy device, a floating device on your back, and then you get into the pool and you don't touch your foot doesn't touch the ground. So it may be 3 meter deep, 5 meter deep in a diving pool, and then you have to wear a flotation device and mimic the running motion on land. So it's 0% impact forces on the lower extremity. And I'd like to introduce how we measure muscle activity in the water. Briefly, this slide shows a waterproof technique for recording muscle activity during running in the water. The waterproof materials with the arm, neck, ceiling, and leg is tightly fitted. So the advantages and disadvantages of the dry suit technique, we use the dry suit in order to record EMG during running in the water. As an advantage, no additional setup time to waterproof the EMG system. It takes so much time to record muscle activity in water and waterproofing the electrodes. And as an advantage, enables EMG data correction during prolonged exercise in water. And as a disadvantage, subject must be able to fit in the available dry suit size. And in addition, the cable to the transmitting unit must run through the neck seal, which creates a potential location and water could enter. But importantly, setting exercise intensity, exercise parameters is important when interpreting EMG observations during running in water. For example, when walking and running at the same speeds, cardiorespiratory responses may be higher during running in the water than on land. And also, when running at the similar cardiorespiratory and perceptual responses, walking speed or running speed in water would be lower than that of running on land. So kinematic description of the gait would be different between water and on land conditions. So we have to consider what to match the exercise intensity when investigating physiological and or biomechanical responses during running in water and on land. So we set the exercise intensity during deep water running and treadmill running at similar RPE and at the similar stride frequency using metronome and at similar physiological responses. When we matched RPE during running in water and on land, muscle activity from the tibialis anterior and gastrocnemius during running in water were lower than that of forward running. In addition, there was no significant difference in muscle activity from the rectus femoris and biceps femoris during running in the water and on land. However, muscle activity from the biceps femoris and rectus femoris during running in water at RPE of 15 was not different than that of running on land at RPE 11. This means that RPE should be elevated during running in the water than that of running on land in order to produce similar amount of muscle activity from the rectus femoris and biceps femoris. Secondly, we matched the exercise intensity by stride frequency. When we run in water and on land at matched stride frequency, muscle activity from the rectus femoris and gastrocnemius during running in water was higher than that of running on dry land. We expected that muscle activity from the lower extremity would be higher during running in water than on land because when we matched stride frequency because of the resistance of water. But it seems that the subject changed their range of motion of the joint by matching stride frequency, maybe in order to avoid getting injury. If the subject produce same amount of range of motion and same cadence, they will get injured. But we did not control the range of motion. However, it seems that the subject controlled their range of motion in order to avoid getting injury. And we matched exercise intensity at similar physiological responses during running in water and on land. And we observed that muscle activity from the rectus femoris, biceps femoris, and tibialis anterior during running in water were similar to that of running on land. However, the muscle activity from the gastrocnemius during running in water was lower than that of running on land. So this is a summary of the magnitude of muscle activity during running in water and on land. So, as I said, when matching RPE, muscle activity in water will be lower than that of running on land. So RPE should be elevated if you would like to induce similar amount of muscle activity. And secondly, when we matched stride frequency during running in water and on land, some muscles were higher, some muscles were lower during running in water than on land. So, and they change gait range of motion when matched stride frequency. However, when we match physiological responses during running in water and on land, muscle activity would be similar between the two modes of exercise. I would like to look at the muscle activity pattern between running in the water and on land. As you can see, this is muscle activity patterns from tibialis anterior and gastrocnemius. The muscle activity pattern during running in the water, it seems flat because it makes sense because your foot is not touching the ground in the water during deep water running. Your foot is not touching the ground, so muscle activity pattern is flat. But on the other hand, gastrocnemius and tibialis anterior muscle activity pattern was a little bit distinct pattern. There is a peak here, there. So during treadmill running, muscle activity patterns has distinct peak during running on land. So the muscle activity patterns from the lower extremity are not the same. They are different. And also, I would like to show that muscle activity patterns from the rectus femoris and biceps femoris, muscle activity patterns from the rectus femoris has high correlation. So the muscle activity patterns from the rectus femoris would be similar between the two modes of exercise, running in water and running on land. However, biceps femoris has a negative high correlation. So during deep water running, it peaks about 30% of gait cycle. On the other hand, it peaks around 80% of gait cycle during running on land. So the muscle coordination pattern would be different between the two modes of exercise. So when we run at the same RPE, you can see that the muscle activity coordination pattern between biceps femoris and rectus femoris is complex during running on land. However, during deep water running, peak and inactive patterns can be observed. So when one is active, one is inactive. When one is active and one is inactive. On the other hand, when we run in the water at higher RPE than that of forward running, running on land at lower RPE, which is RPE 15 versus RPE 11 for deep water running and treadmill running respectively, muscle activity patterns, muscle activity coordination patterns would become similar. So what I would like to suggest is that matching heart rate is recommended to produce similar magnitude of muscle activity during deep water running to that of treadmill running. And also, a higher RPE should be used to elicit similar magnitude and patterns of muscle activity during deep water running than that of treadmill running on dry land. So I have introduced our line of research on manipulation of impact forces during running. Maybe 10% increase in stride frequency may be recommended to as a cross-training alternative. Maybe you can run backward versus forward running as a cross-training perspective. During running on a body weight support treadmill, you may be observed similar muscle activity pattern with decreased magnitude of muscle activity, but those physiological demand can be maintained with successful running speed and body weight support combinations. And lastly, during running in the water, RP should be elevated in the water than on land in order to induce similar amount of physiological demands. And also, heart rate should be matched in order to induce similar muscle activity. So I would like to introduce the publication list. If you are interested in our studies, For the stride frequency part, we have published in the European Journal of Applied Physiology in 2015. And for direction of locomotion, we published in Human Movement Science this year, this month. And then body weight support treadmill, you can search in also in the Journal of Sports Sciences, research in sports medicine and human movement science, if you're interested in. And for aquatic environment papers, we published a review article in the Exercise and Sports Sciences Reviews, and also we published an originals in Medicine and Science and Sports and Exercise, Gait and Posture, and the International Journal of Sports Medicine. So if you are interested in, you can search on the publication, please. That would be great. And finally, acknowledgement. Do you have a good friend as a colleague? This is Dr. John Mercer from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. He is my best friend. And this is Dr. Bates, and this is Dr. Tufek from University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I greatly appreciate their directions and their thoughtful supervisions. Without their support, without their supervisions, I may not be here to present my works. So I greatly appreciate their support and guidance. And these are the graduate students that I've worked with. Yesterday, I was told to introduce how to write a good manuscript in a prestigious journal. And unfortunately, there is no magic to publish in a prestigious journal. But there maybe is one magic that if you have a good team, results would be good. Maybe we are allowed to present our work. Maybe we are allowed to have a space in the journal to present our work if we work together well. And in addition to that, my own goal is, as a professor at university, is to provide a scientist who is more successful than I am. That's one of my goals. So I hope these guys will be more successful in the future than I am. And I truly appreciate their supports and help to make this project successful. And this is the last slide of my presentation. Then what is the beauty of your research? Thank you very much.
Okay, applause to Professor Kenji Matsumoto. The presentation very interesting, specific area and deep discussion. Professor Wance Bunrut will presentation about 20 minutes. And after this, please you all participants to prepare your question, and we have more time to discuss.
The reason behind this study begin with the futsal. The futsal is a high-intensity intermittent sport. In the game, the players will perform the medium intensity running around 28.5%, at high intensity running around 13.7%, and at the maximum speed running at 8.9%. And the average of the heart rate, they will perform around 90% of the maximum heart rate. And they require the ability to sprint in short distance many times in a game, called repeated sprint ability. And the second reason is the altitude training or hypoxic training. The study of the altitude training was heavily delved into during and after the 1968 at the Mexico City Olympics. The Mexico City lies at an altitude of 2,240 meters above the sea level. It was during these Olympic Games that endurance events saw significant below record finishes, while anaerobic sprint events broke all types of records. And the fundamental theory behind altitude training is simple. By exposing an athlete to an environment that is low in oxygen, like on a mountaintop or the simulated altitude room, the body will eventually adapt to this stress by getting more efficient at transporting and using oxygen. We have three contemporary altitude training models. The first one is live high, train high. That means you have to take your athletes to stay on the top of the mountain and training over there as well. The second one is live high, train low. They're living in the top of the mountain and come down to training. And the third one is live low, train high. That means they are living in the sea level and training at the top of the mountain. And we will talk about the live high, train low, because in Thailand we didn't have a high level mountain, so we are living in the sea level and try to training them in the top of the mountain. So what is the normobaric hypoxic training? It's the normal atmospheric air. It contains of 20.9% of oxygen and 78% of nitrogen. And the balance is a mixture of gases known as argon. The barometric pressure is 760 millimeter mercury. And the hypobaric hypoxic means this lower barometric pressure from the sea level. In my study, we compare with the oxygen pressure at the 21% and 14.5%, 13.5% and 12.5%. That's mean on the sea level and at the 3,000 meter above the sea level, and 3,500 and 4,000 meter. And the normobaric hypoxia is the same pressure as normoxia. Normobaric hypoxic training stresses the general physiological functions to the max at lower workloads without causing undue stress on local injured tissues and muscle. And high intensity training at velocities and thus produce stress on the musculoskeletal system. This is the stimulated altitude system, a simulated normobaric hypoxic system. The simulated altitude is just control and oxygen level, but no pressure change. The third reason is repeated sprints. And the repeated sprint in hypoxia, because of many sports involved with repeated short duration sprints of less than 10 seconds and followed by less than 60 seconds of a brief recovery period. Repeated sprints training has been shown to improve oxygen utilization and increase anaerobic metabolism. The aerobic system is involved in generating ATP during recovery from repeated sprints. The mechanism of the ATP resynthesis is over here. During sprinting, the energy will releases, and the ATP will synthesis during recovery between the sprinting. And the beneficial of normobaric hypoxic to repeated sprint ability is to increase anaerobic glycolytic activity. The second is modified acid-base homeostasis. The third one is to increase the stress on the anaerobic metabolic pathway, thereby resulting in unregulation of anaerobic metabolism, and to improve time to fatigue and power output. And the last one is to improve repeated sprint, but not endurance performance. And this one is the sample of the research with the hypoxic compared to the normobaric group with the repeated sprint performance outcome. Sorry, I will skip this one because the training in the hypoxic with the repeated sprint will enhance the oxygen utilization, so they will improve the repeated sprint ability. And training in the hypoxic, they will adaptations at the molecule level, and the muscle blood perfusion, amplitude muscle, and will increase the fast twitch fiber acting like oxidative fiber, and then they will improve the repeated sprint ability. And the muscle blood perfusion amplitude muscle will give a greater waste metabolite removal, so there will less fiber fatigue, and then it will improve the repeated sprint ability. And the shuttle repeated sprint, that means the many research equipped with the much smaller hypoxic chambers are not allowing performing long distance sprints. And shuttle repeated sprints training is feasible in hypoxic chambers of limited size. And shuttle repeated sprint training in hypoxia in comparison to normoxia might lead to better running speed maintenance during the repeated sprint ability. This is the example of the research in repeated sprint. And this one is some research from acute effect studies. The acute effects of shuttle repeated sprint in normal baric hypoxic environments in futsal players is actually organized by the Patravut Kalsanit. He is a PhD student in my faculty, and Dr. Kenneth Graham is a co-advisor from the New South Wales Institute of Sport, Sydney, Australia. The participants are 16 football players from the Chulalongkorn University team, and the protocol is they will perform the shuttle repeated sprint for 6 times by 10 seconds in 5-meter distance, and recovery time was 20 seconds by active rest. And the culture balance design was used in the random order to participants to complete for testing over 4 weeks in 4 oxygen environments with a different inspired oxygen fraction at the 20.9%, that's mean at the sea level, at the 14.5, 13.5 and 12.5%. The variables are blood lactate concentration, heart rate, pulse oxygen saturation, rating of perceived exertion, and electromyography or EMG. Because of the small room, so they have just only 5.8 meter just for shuttle sprint. This is the hypoxic room in my laboratory in sports science, Chulalongkorn. The hypoxic room is from the altitude training system from New South Wales of Australia. And the results shows that the heart rate, the blood lactate concentration, the rating of perceived exertion, and oxygen saturation during a shuttle repeated sprint exercise performed at a different inspired oxygen fraction. At 4 different inspired oxygen fraction, the mean and the SD are significantly different from 20.9%, and the significantly different from 14.5%, and the last one is significantly different from the 13.5. So the conclusion of the study is that the shuttle's repeated sprint can be performed in the inspired oxygen fraction at 14.5 and 13.5%, whereas the shuttle repeated sprints performed will drop when exercised in the inspired oxygen fraction at 12 8.5%. That means you can train your athlete at the 3,000 to 3,500 meter above the sea level. It will be better than a 4,000 meter. Okay, that is my study.
Okay, applause
Thank
to
you very much.
Professor Wancai. Okay, guys. Professor Wancai at the faculty have laboratory water pump. He have exercise and very good equipment in laboratory. So I want to invite Professor Kenji and Professor Wolf to going up to in France. And now we have discussion. We have about 15 minutes. So I want to invite 4 questions. Yeah. 4 questions. Okay. First, the second behind Professor Sayuti. The third, 4. Okay. In the middle ring. Okay, 5. Yeah. Okay, 5. Please you mention your name and your institution, and I hope you can give short question. Okay.
Thank you for the opportunity. Firstly, I would like to introduce. My name is Eka Novita Indra, Eka, from Yogyakarta State University. Especially, I'm a teaching staff in sports science faculty. And my question goes to Mr. Kenji Masumoto. Thank you for mesmerizing me about the fact that you showed, because maybe many of us already do the same method. I mean the backward running, yeah. But you show us about the fact, the benefits, which is let's say it is a good data. And my question is, in spite of to manipulate the impact force, what special consideration, maybe there is special consideration before someone or athlete doing backward running, maybe whether related to athlete itself or the supported equipment, maybe any special equipment to make the training safe, or based on the athlete itself to doing backward running. Thank you. Is it clear?
Yeah, thank you very much for your question. I'm sorry about my language. I don't clearly, straightforward understand your question.
Okay.
What is your question?
Okay, I will repeat once again.
Short question.
Okay, to change the direction of locomotion is one of manipulative work concerning to impact forces. And my question is, what special consideration we might prepare, maybe based on athlete itself or supporting equipment that we have to prepare before doing backward running?
What special?
Thank you very much for your question. Introduced the hat with a mirror. I don't want to wear that though. It looks bad, but
Okay, your answer give before.
I'm sorry.
Quickly.
Yeah. So regarding equipment for backward running, I am not sure. I'm sorry, but I'm not sure if there is any special equipment for backward running training. But I do think that it is important to consider a familiarization to backward running because we are not used to backward running. So that's one of the other questions to be answered by research, is familiarization. But equipment, I've never thought about it. Thank you very much. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Okay.
But thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Prof. Kenji. And now I invite you in France. Prof. Sayuti before. After this, in front, you prepare.
Thank you for this occasion. So first, actually, I have two questions.
Please you say your name.
My name is Sayuti Sahara. I come from West Sumatra, Padang, from the Faculty of Sports Science in University of State of Padang. We met in the morning. Yeah. I have two questions here. Not question, maybe. First to Mr. Brett Schneider. Guten Tag.
Professor Wolf, you mean?
And then to Mr. Masumoto. First, Mr. Brett Schneider, I had to know about how to fight obesity in the children in Europe. So I would like to know how far, because in 1982 I was there, and there is so many, let's say, the poster that the Germany want to fight the obesity in the children. So how far you're fighting against the obesity in the children up right now? And to Mr. Masumoto, this is very interesting for me also, because maybe if you go forward and backward, maybe backward is more many things to think about maybe about the circumstance, yeah, about the land, yeah. So I think the energy cost is more than forward. And the question is, maybe you have another study about the comparison about the flat food and the curved food to the energy system here. Flat food means because the palm of the food is so flat, there is no curve here, and the curved food. Maybe you have another study about that, especially in energy cost. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And the second person? And the third person, please.
Check. Thank you for the opportunity. My name is Abdullah Al-Asmi. I am a medical doctor that concerned in the sport rehabilitation and sport medicine. And this is very interesting that I can meet Mr. Brett Schneider and Mr. Kenji. I have two questions. The first is for Mr. Brett Schneider. I think we have a same problem in the Indonesia. The newest data, statistic data from the health ministry says that from age 5 to 12, we have 18.8% of the obesity children, and for the age 16 to the 18, we have 7.3%. This is a very dramatically increase. That the another data from Jakarta says that 34% of the obese children suffer from metabolic syndrome. So this is very interesting for me to have more research, and I'm doing my thesis research about the metabolic syndrome in the adolescent, and I found that my sample from the 45 adolescent, I found that approximately 36% of my sample was metabolic syndrome, and more than 60%.
Maybe to direct questions, sir.
Yeah, 60% of them have genetically history of see video from his parents. So this is a problem because in Indonesia we have a famous idiom that big or fat is symbol of prosperity. So how can we do as the practitioners, sport practitioner, to reduce the overweight of our obesity children and improve the physical activity for our people? And then the second from Mr. Kenji, this is related with the first question. How to simple practice running with safely for overweight or obesity people or people that have risk for the osteoarthritic of knee joint, that this is very damage which if we run hard. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Please you give answer. I invite the fourth question. Please, you mention your name.
Okay, thank you so much. The first, I would like to introduce myself to you. My name is Shamsul Bakri. I'm a student from Master Program Yogyakarta State University. My major is sport. Okay, my question to Mr. Wolf. Well, talking about overweight, in present time, many young people wake, but also they sport every day. So my question is, are there any specific sport solution that can lose weight? That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay. The last question. Okay, please stand up.
Thank you very much for the time. I have question for Professor Kenji Masumoto from Japan.
Please, your name?
Yes, my name is Siti Baitul from Semarang State University. This question for Professor Kenji Masumoto. Good presentation and really interesting about your research. Because I did some research about aquatic and deep water, but special I make it a design about aquarobic exercise on immunology. So my question is, did you measure some of biochemistry marker on your research?
Please you repeat.
Did you measure about biochemistry marker on your research? Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay, Professor Wolf, you have many questions, and Professor Kenji, but Professor Wancai never question. Okay, please time to Professor Wolf. Please you give answer.
Yeah. To the first question, when you refer to the situation in Germany and in Europe, if you remember the map I showed you with a big difference in the prevalence of obesity in the East European countries and in the Southern European countries, you look for an explanation. And the explanation is, it is only now 25 years after the Iron Curtain came down. At that time, people in Eastern Europe were extremely active physically, and there were no computers, so they couldn't spend screen time. And as far as nutrition is concerned, I mean, it was unhealthy food from an objective point of view, very fatty, but nevertheless, it could be compensated by a high degree of physical activity and a very low degree of sedentary time. Things have dramatically changed now. Perhaps you know, that is the Baltic countries, Estonia, Lithuania, which are extremely developed as far as the use of electronic media is concerned. So the amount of screen time, gaming, and especially not gaming computers is extremely high there. And therefore, I think our problem is not so much the lack of physical activity, but is the dramatic increase of sedentary time. And the interesting thing, in addition to what I've said, is that recent studies have found out that sedentary time is a risk factor independent of physical inactivity. So that means we have to face this problem. So far the first question. Then the second question, that was quite interesting for me. You were referring to your own study in Jakarta. I do not know whether you also tried to find out something about the socio-economic status of the families. And this is the interesting thing. In Europe, it is young people coming from families with a low economic status, with the highest amount of obesity, and the reason is they like fast food, they like sugary drinks. And it is not so much screen time because they cannot afford to buy, well, let's say, computers, smartphones, and so on. In Indonesia, as far as I know, and I've read, as you can imagine, quite a lot of studies, it is exactly the other way around. It is young people coming from families with a high socioeconomic standard, with higher rates of prevalence of obesity. And my explanation, comparing Europe and Indonesia, is that we have to focus on sedentary behavior instead of focusing on physical activity. Physical activity, I mean, we have to do all we can to increase physical activity. But I think the most important problem is sedentary time sitting in front of the computer. And I would like to talk to you about your study after this session's end. I would like to talk to you. Well, and the last question is, well, what do you try to do that young people lose weight? Again, I can repeat what I've said before. It is the three key factors. We have to try to do everything that they take healthy food instead of fast food and instead of sugary drinks. We have to do everything to increase physical activity, and we have to do everything to reduce sedentary time. That means media use. If we focus on all three key factors of overweight, I think we can be successful. If we focus on one element only, we won't be successful. So I don't know whether you are happy with this answer, but that's all I can tell you.
Okay, thank you. I think very clearly the answer from Professor Wolf. If you have not yet clear, to be continued in lunch session. And now, please, your time, about 5 minutes maybe, to answer your 2 or 3 questions, please.
Thank you very much for your interest in our study. For the first question, unfortunately, I only have the data in healthy individuals, and I would like to switch gear to the pathological populations. For example, we have demonstrated that muscle activity from the back muscle, paraspinal muscles, was during backward walking in the water was higher than that of backward running on land in 2005. And in 2010, a group from the United States demonstrated that backward walking would be effective for the treatment of the lower back pain patients. But unfortunately, I don't have any pathological data in the pathological population, so I would like to move on to the pathological population further. Okay, thank you very much. And for the second question, it's interesting. Thank you for your interest in our rhino research of aquatic running. Again, I have not measured biochemical responses during running in the water, but I'm truly interested in that type of study because it's impressed though, but we are going to publish one article on the maximal physiological and responses and muscle activity during running in the water and on land. And muscle activity during running in water was lower, and physiological responses during running in water was lower in water than on land. And then my next question is why we stop exercising in water and on land. Especially in water, they stop earlier. And why is that? And then it may be imperative to include biochemical variables in order to understand why we stop exercising. So that would be a great suggestion. Thank you very much. If possible, we can work together. Thanks.
Prof, you will... Okay.
Running backwards. Again, empirical data from my own country. If we think of running backwards on a bench, it is 40% of young people who are no longer able to run backwards on a bench. So I do not know whether you have data from Japan. That would be interesting. But my conclusion would be, you said, well, as soon as we try to improve their backwards running, they also improve their forward runnings. I have the impression we should do everything we can to improve their ability of coordination. That means running backwards.
Okay, all participants. I think the time is enough, and all presentation are very clear. But then you.
Yeah, I'd like to answer
1
to
minute.
his. I'm sorry.
Okay, please.
Yeah, I'd like to answer to his question. It's very interesting. It is my personal opinion that there may be a different path to control movements for forward and backward running. For example, it has been reported that the brainstem activation, it's an imaginary study, but it may be a different path for the motor control pathway for forward and backward running. For example, CPZ would exist for forward running, so we don't think about it when running forward. But frontal brain activity would be enhanced during backward running. So we have to think about how to perform backward running. So it is obvious that the brain activity would be different for forward and backward running. That means there may be a different pathway to control movement exist. And in fact, we have demonstrated that muscle coordination pattern would be different between the two modes of exercise. So they are different muscle coordination pattern. And why backward running improve forward running performance? It may be that the entire physical fitness would increase with backward running training. But I think that it may not be related to the increased motor control patterns by the backward running training, because it's different.
Okay, thank you. And the closing speech. All participant, all presenter is more good idea, good presentation, and inspiring to all. And give applause more boldly. Forgive me mistake if I have mistake, and we meet again and to another session. And wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Ladies and gentlemen, before stepping to the next sessions, which is plenary session 2, as the expressions of appreciations, the Dean of Faculty of Sports Science, Universitas Negeri Yogyakarta, would like to present a token to the invited speakers. We would like to invite Professor Dr. Wawan S. Suherman, M.A.D. to come forward, please.
Okay, thank you very much.